Welcome to Fuel for Thought. I'm Gráinne Earley, Director of Employee Experience Solutions at Fuel. And in this series, we'll be meeting the visionaries, innovators, and change makers, shaping employee experience today. From behind-the-scenes champions to industry leaders, join us as we explore emerging trends, groundbreaking strategies, and fresh perspectives, all with the aim of giving you some fuel for thought. In this episode, we're chatting with Aoife O'Brien, international keynote speaker and founder of Happier at Work. As someone who is as passionate as I am about employees being happy in the workplace, I'm really thrilled to welcome Aoife as a guest on Fuel for Thought to chat on how we can help companies build a happier workplace, fueling productivity, engagement and retention, and ultimately impacting on each company's bottom line. Welcome, Aoife. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much, Gráinne. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today.
Oh, it's fantastic to have you. Do you want to kick off? We might just start with you telling us a little bit about Happier at Work.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I suppose for me, the inspiration came from experiences that I had at work myself. I had an almost 20-year career in market research in the fast-moving consumer goods industry, and I always loved my work and I was always super ambitious. And then I just had a couple of experiences, let's say, that left me feeling a bit deflated, like I'm not sure if this is the right thing for me. I was passed over for promotion at one stage, and then another time it was just like, it was kind of a roller coaster, up and down for a few years, and I just didn't feel fulfilled at work, and I knew I had so much more to offer, but I didn't really know where to go next. So I left my 20-year career, basically, and I went on and I did some coaching qualifications, and I did a master's then in organizational behavior. And it was during the master's that I asked all of the important questions about, like, well, why was I not happy at work, and how do we actually fix that? And I think I also came to the realization that I'm not the only one who's felt like this. And I think we can look at it both from the individual and the organizational perspective. As an individual, you want to feel fulfilled in the work that you do, but as an organization, it's actually really beneficial to have employees who are really fulfilled by the work that they do. They work better, they work longer, they stay longer. So there's, benefits all around, is the way I see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, for me, the passion and why I was so excited to have you on here was all I seem to talk about is employee experience and what that really means. And for me, it's about the happiness. It's whether you call it employer brand or employer experience or employee engagement or people and culture, or whatever you're kind of referring to it about. At the end of the day, everyone is just looking to make sure their employees are happier, which then in turn obviously is good for the business, and it keeps everything going both ways.
You can think of it as how do people actually experience work on a day-to-day basis, and do they have a positive experience or a negative experience? Are you waking up on a Sunday dreading Monday? Do you want to turn off the alarm? And I suppose a lot of people want to probably turn off the alarm on a Monday, so not a great example, but are you really dreading going in there and having to face your colleagues, or having to do the same old work again that doesn't really spark you? And, I suppose on the one hand, showing people that there is another way, like that you do have options, you do have a choice when it comes to that. Like, I'm not so naive to think that everyone has a choice and everyone has options, but most people do, and they don't realize, and they kind of feel a little bit stuck. And then from the organization's perspective, like, as a leader, who wants to work in an organization where people are not thriving, or where you're creating an environment of us versus them, or, we say that we don't want to work in those kind of environments. Why do we create them, you know?
I always think of that, like that Sunday feeling, it's the Glen Rowe feeling for me.
Yeah, we talked about this before.
As soon as the Glen Rowe music starts, it was like you were always sent to bed as a child. Anyone who's not from Ireland maybe won't know that feeling, but that feeling of, oh God, I can't believe this week is about to start. And like, we'd all love to be in Barbados for the week, like, let's not lie. But I mean, to have a feeling of dread is an awful way for people to be thinking of where they spend the majority of their life, And so what kind of strategies do you kind of put in place with companies or with individuals to look at them being happier at work and seeing how they can get there?
And I suppose before we go on to that, I just want to reiterate, like, but happiness at work is not like I'm going to show up 100% of my time and be happy all the time. But if you can get to about 80%, that you're like, most of my week I'm actually really enjoying the job that I do. I really like the colleagues that I work with. From the research I did as part of my master's, and I asked all of those hard questions, and I became obsessed with this idea. And I came up with my framework called the Happier at Work framework. And in that, we look at 3 pillars. So there's the values or the culture of the organization. That's pillar 1. Then we look at drivers or need satisfaction at work. That's pillar 2. And then pillar 3 is our strengths, or how do we how do we use our strengths at work? How do we leverage our strengths? And do we know what they are? And do other people know what they are? And then it's all underpinned by psychological safety. Again, like kind of a buzzword these days, but it's so important to feel okay to speak up about what's going on for you. And as a leader, creating that type of environment where people feel okay to challenge what's going on, or to share their ideas, or just to kind of share what's going on for them on a personal level as well. And then it's all overarched by leadership, because we have to have the right leaders in place to execute on these pillars. If you're a leader, your job is to develop other people. There's no two ways about it. And I think people, myself included, you get enamored by, oh wow, there's there's a salary increase, there's a title that goes with it, and you don't really think about, well, there's the day-to-day admin of actually dealing with people, and then there's dealing with people's issues and their personal stuff that they come to you with, as well as helping them to develop their own careers. And I think we often forget those other parts of leadership, and I think it's important to understand really what leadership is, what makes a good leader, offer alternative to being a people leader as well, so you can progress through an organization without necessarily having having a people leadership position, that you can become a subject matter expert. Happy to share kind of across any of the pillars. I kind of went into
and
leadership a little
I love
bit.
that actually, like the fact that you've broken it down so simply into the three pillars as well, because when I talk about employee experience, I talk about kind of 3 areas of employee experience as well. And this whole piece really fits into the craft and culture, which I feel is like kind of our middle pillar. We talk a lot about brand and creating that brand awareness, and then also creating experiences as the other 2 kind of sides of it. But that craft and culture piece is what is everything. You've just hit the nail on there. It's all of that stuff about being in the workplace. How do you feel in the workplace? Where is your psychological safety? How are the leadership showing up? How are you progressing in that company? Who are your colleagues that you're working with, and how are you working together? So it's all of that piece. It's the culture of the company is what does lead to that happiness at work. And,
absolutely. And like for me, so to kind of touch across the 3 pillars, we've touched on psychological safety, we've touched on leadership, but the 3 main pillars, like the first is around culture and values. So do those organization have values? Like most organizations these days have values. They might be on the wall, they might be in your email signature, but most organizations will have values. But are those values the actual lived experience of the people who work there? Like that's the question you should be asking. Or is there some sort of a mismatch or a misalignment there where my day-to-day experience of the organization looks nothing like what they say it's supposed to be? And I've had that myself, and I didn't, it really breeds mistrust if you say on the one hand, one of our values is simple, but actually it's, and this was me, it's the most complicated bureaucratic organization I ever worked in. And
the value just becomes a poster on a wall.
Exactly. It becomes meaningless. And it also means that I'm thinking, well, if they're lying about that, what else are they lying about? And what else can't I trust them about? And so the values piece becomes really important. But then also understanding as an individual, how do my values align with the values of the organization? And do they align with the values of the organization? As a leader, you can think about it as, how do I make that connection for individuals to show them how their values align with the values of the organization, and how they fit in with the overall culture, what's expected, what's not expected, and how do we drive that culture? So tolerating poor behavior, again, this is where leadership comes in. Like if you're tolerating that poor behavior that really goes against the values, that's perpetuating this poor behavior, because it's not being called into account. And equally, I think on the other side, when people perform and behave in line with the values, it's really, really important to call that out and say, we're celebrating this person for demonstrating these values. On the need satisfaction or the drivers at work, it's something that I don't see a lot of people talking about at all. And it was really one of the crucial parts of the research that I did. So I did my research on this. It's a theory of motivation called self-determination theory, and it looks at autonomy, relatedness, and competence. So autonomy being the sense of choice and control over what you do and how you do it. Relatedness, then how you get along with your colleagues. And competence is your feeling of capability of actually being able to do the role. And we have unique needs. Those are universal needs. We all have those needs. But we also have unique needs that need to be satisfied. So it could be things like stability, or it could be variety, or it could be status, or it could be flexibility or recognition. The really important thing that I found with needs is it's not just about satisfying the need. So let's take autonomy as an example. You know, the pandemic came about and suddenly overnight we had autonomy. Everyone had autonomy. But actually, I think we were really lacking in guidance. So if you have too little autonomy, what does this mean? Where do I go from here? As if you lack autonomy, that means you're being told what to do and how to do it. But if you have too much, you're kind of floundering and you're like, I'm not sure which direction we're supposed to go in. I need to spend time making those decisions, and I worry about whether those decisions are the right things. So it's about getting that balance right, which I think is really interesting. That happens at an individual level. So you can't do this at scale. You have to be a manager who has these conversations and knows how to use the language of how are people's needs being met at work,
and that's where, like, making it at that individual level is where this becomes not just a poster on a wall, and it becomes something that's actually transformational for a company. Because I think when whether it's values or whether it's a mission statement or whether it's an EVP and a company is launching it, everyone gets so excited. Wow, this is so powerful. This is amazing. But if nobody's living it, and then it's like, okay, back to work now. That
then
job
you
is
go back
done.
To your day
and
job.
You're like, but how does this translate in the day to day for me?
Yeah.
How does this translate in terms of my interactions with the leadership team or with my colleagues? What does this actually feel for me now that we've had a big launch and we've put it out there? How do I live and breathe that? And I think that's where it becomes transformational for a company, when they can really showcase how they live and breathe it.
But that's where leaders come in. It's the leader's responsibility. But they might not know that it's their responsibility to actually translate that strategy or to translate that culture into the lived experience of the employees. And let's face it, leaders have enough on their plates as well, that it's like, is this something else to add to my list? But it's really not. It's about doing your day-to-day job, but in the way that's expected and in the behaviors that have been shared and in line with the strategy that they're aiming towards.
And you said something about the values and trying to match your values with the companies, and I think it's really interesting because that's coming up quite a lot in the research at the moment for employees coming up the ranks now. And new generations are coming into the workforce and they're looking for things that older generations weren't, and one of those things is value alignment. Like, it's not just about a salary anymore. It's about what the workplace culture is. What am I going to feel when I go into work? Am I going to be proud to work for this company? And how do our values align? And I think it's really interesting to see that that's what the new generation are really looking to get from a workplace as well, which shows how important it is to be focusing on this instead of just focusing on the bottom line or whatever it is.
And for a long time I was really obsessed with this idea of, like, is there an easy way to find a match between an individual and an organization based on their values? And for me it became too much, because if you were to ask people what their values are, they may not know. And if you were to assess them on what their values are, it would probably take way too long to be able to assess what they actually are. But I think if you can look at an organization and see, like, and speak to people who work there and just ask about the day-to-day experience, because here's the other thing, that what you see on social media, what you see posted out there, is not necessarily the experience of what's going on the inside. And there's nothing worse than entering an organization that you thought on paper looks amazing, and you've seen the amazing posts and you just think, wow, and it could be a great brand to work for as well. Then you get in there and you're like, oh, this is not what I expected at all. And that happens as well.
And I think I talk a lot about the journey of employee experience and how it needs to be from that moment that you're hooked into the company and you think, oh, I might want to work there, the whole way through. And that onboarding piece and the dream to reality of, is this company going to live up to what I thought? And the dream I was sold is so important. And I mean, the stats are insane of, like, if that onboarding process goes well and people really feel, okay, I'm invested in this company and they are living up to everything that I was looking for, like, the chances of them staying on and having longevity in the career in that company is 80% higher than somebody who has a bit of an iffy onboarding experience. They're feeling a little bit funny about it. They're like, oh God, there's something that doesn't quite align. And as soon as there's one or two doubts in there, it just, it breeds,
And I think I'm trying to think of really solid examples where I've had a brilliant onboarding experience. I can think of the ones where I've had a terrible onboarding
Yes.
experience
Yeah.
where my name has an apostrophe in it. And I think they set up my email with or without an apostrophe or something. Anyway, I had to get in touch with IT. And my manager then said, and who told you could get in touch with IT to get that fixed? And it was a bit like, oh, wow, I'm being really proactive here. And
Yeah,
actually, you're
yeah.
telling me not to do that.
Yeah.
So, you
Wow,
know, that
micromanaging
should
to
have,
the hilt.
well,
Yeah.
it should have been a
Yeah.
red flag for me. And I
Yeah.
think I had been out of work because I'd been traveling for about a year and a half. And so I was probably just happy to be in a job,
Yeah.
you know, and earning money again that, it didn't even register with me. But when I
Yeah.
look back now and I think, wow, I was being really proactive. And I remember also bringing in, you know, here's my strengths. I've done these assessments and I've done all of these things, feeling like I'm being proactive and
Yeah.
not doing her job for her, but making her job a little bit easier.
Yeah.
And then like the reception was
You're
a bit
met
like,
with- yeah.
yeah, a little bit
Yeah.
of a brick wall. Yeah.
And do you feel, are we evolving from that? I would like to think that the answer is yes. But from the days of kind of the focus not being on the employees and being happy at work and having those kind of negative experiences, like, do you think with companies that you're working with, are we evolving quickly enough, and are companies kind of putting enough emphasis on it at the moment, do you think?
I think it's hard to say all companies are doing that.
Yeah,
I think a
yeah.
lot of companies are doing that. And I think the ones who are getting it really right are going to be the ones who win.
Yeah.
If I think back, like I left corporate about 7 years ago. And at that time, I think we had maybe a well-being day or maybe a well-being week, but
Yeah.
a well-being in general, like a program or well-being as part of the ongoing dialogue in that company, forget it. Like you wouldn't have had
Yeah.
that at all. So I think
Yeah.
things are evolving. I think to some degree evolving because of the demands of employees
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
As you say, the newer generations who are coming in and they have different expectations. They want to see ESG programs. They want to see that companies are giving back, that they're doing
Yeah.
good in the world, that
Yeah.
they're not just there to make a buck, you
Yeah.
know. So I do think that things are changing. Not everyone is changing. And I think, again, it's maybe not at the company level, it's probably at the leader level. And leaders aren't being held to account. So if there's a leader who is toxic, they're just not being held, you
Yeah.
know, they're not being held responsible for that.
Yeah.
Or it's just going unnoticed in
Yeah.
some way. And people are leaving. You know, I think oftentimes you leave because of a boss rather than because of the general culture.
Yeah. And like the last thing we want is for us having to wait it out until those people aren't in businesses anymore.
Exactly.
Like we want there to be change, and
Yeah.
we want people to realize that things are changing.
Yeah.
Like I thought it was very interesting. I was, you know, another buzzword, because there's a lot of buzzwords around employee experience at the moment, and I'm sure you're hearing all the same buzzwords I am. The boomerang employee is so big at the moment.
Yeah.
You know, that like 15% of people that are going into jobs at the moment have worked there before.
Oh,
like
wow.
the
Okay.
percentage is way higher than any of us would think. And that's
Yeah.
because their circumstances may have changed. They may have had to leave a position for, you know, but if they enjoyed the job they were in, they enjoyed the colleagues and they liked the company,
Yeah.
then they're quite happy to come back. And
Yeah.
it's not seen the same way as it used to be, where, you know, oh, that's going backwards. I've already worked there and that chapter is closed.
Exactly,
That's not
yeah.
how it is at the moment.
Yeah.
It's very much like, okay, well, even at the outboarding stage, or the offboarding, or whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
when people are moving on from a company, that's a really key moment for employee experience as well.
It
And
is.
to make sure that they feel happy in how that process was handled, that they felt they were welcomed to walk out the door, as odd as that sound, but you know, that they feel good about them
Yeah.
departing that company.
Yeah.
And it leaves a feeling of, I really enjoyed working there, and whatever the circumstances are that I'm not anymore, you know,
Yeah.
I'll always have a soft spot for that company, and I'll always speak highly of that
Yeah.
company.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important that it's another thing that is now, it's different from it ever was before,
Yeah.
you know?
That you feel listened to.
Yeah.
You kind of, like, I feel I was able to, like, air my grievances is probably the best way to describe it, but that seems really negative. But I was able
Yeah.
to share, like, this is what was going on for me,
Yeah,
and this
yeah.
is what actually happened. Because you don't really get that opportunity
Yeah.
to do that on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
On that note, what I'm seeing more and more is stay interviews. So actually talking to people about the reasons that they stay in an organization,
Oh,
which are
yes.
different from the opposite
Yeah.
of the reasons that you leave.
Yeah.
So the reason you stay is not necessarily the opposite of the reason that you leave. And I think
Mm-hmm.
having those conversations before people leave is really important.
Yeah,
The other thing I'm seeing is alumni groups. So I'm in an alumni group for an organization I worked with in London. And I think that's a fantastic way to keep in touch with old employees as well, so that you can, you've got to, it saves, well, from an organization's perspective, you're saving on the recruitment costs because someone's worked there already. You're not having to shell out 30 grand or whatever to a recruiter to fill that role for you. You have a ready-made pool of talent right there who worked there previously. They know they know the customers, they know what they know the colleagues, they know what it's like, they know what the culture is like to work there. It's kind of a less ramp up time to get people up to speed, I think, if they've previously worked there. And then as an individual, you're absolutely right. It's not seen as us going backwards. Like, it's not a step back at all. It's a progression in your career, especially if you left, you went somewhere else, you realize that, like, you realize, I suppose, what you missed or what you used to have in the previous place that you worked, and you go back and you work there,
and you're often bringing back new skills and a new perspective, and also a new energy for the company, because you're thinking, oh God, that I actually maybe didn't appreciate that as much when I was there.
Exactly.
And it's like, wow, now I'm getting the opportunity to go back, which is amazing.
And I think I did that early in my career. I really took for granted. I worked in a fantastic organization, that one in London that I mentioned. Fantastic organization. And I didn't realize how lucky I was until later in my career, when I entered into organizations that were just, one was pure toxic, and another one, it was just like, they just didn't invest in their people, and it really showed. And I know it's the first, I think, where I'm seeing struggles is I meet all of these amazing people that work in HR, or they work in people and culture divisions, or whatever it may be called, employee engagement teams, and they're all dying to invest, but the stakeholder buy-in maybe isn't there, or the company are going through layoffs, and it's so hard because it's the first thing that seems to get cut. Is, oh, that's fine, we'll take away those things, but really the impact that that's having on the business, and on, because once the employees aren't happy, the business suddenly isn't happy. Exactly.
Because a happy employee equals a happy customer equals a happy company, and I think it's trying to find that line and make people understand that collation. Is that something that you have to speak to the companies about, to try and get them to understand that piece of how important this is?
I think it's a really hard sell, and I'd love to see like dollar research around this to say, and this is how much it's actually costing your business. I loved what you say about happy workers, happy customers. I think you said, I talk about that all the time. Like, I'm so, and I've been that person who is working with clients and I'm not happy. And it does have a knock-on impact. I'm sorry to say, but it really does, It's, you show up and you're like, I actually don't really care about this company that much anymore. And therefore, like, I still give my all to my clients, but I'm just, there's stuff that you won't do, or that, you won't go the extra mile, or whatever it might be. And it really has an impact. It's the first thing to have, the budget cut, training, development, investing in people. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. Like, if you can implement the stuff that I talked about from the Happier at Work framework, that doesn't cost a lot of money. It's just the awareness of that, and maybe a little bit of training if they want to invest in a little bit. If you want to invest more, then it's like, we can do a fuller, wider, longer approach. But I would love, and I don't know of any research that exists, but that says if you invest this amount, then you're going to get 200% return on investment, because your employees stay longer. And there's loads of kind of specific stats. So if someone leaves an organization, and let's face it, a lot of people will leave if they're not happy, if things aren't going well for them there, whatever it might be. If someone leaves an organization, it can cost up to 200% of that person's salary. So if, for easy maths, let's say someone's earning 100K, that costs the organization for one person to leave 200K. Do you know, like, it's a lot of money.
And what it might have taken to have that person feel engaged and feel that they're wanted in their workplace could have been, like, the price on it could have been a matter of a manager showing up for that person in a certain way, and maybe there being some sort of reward and recognition program that, again, doesn't have to cost a lot, but showed them that they were valued in the company. And the cost of that 100, 200 grand that
Yeah.
they're losing,
Yeah.
you know, it might have cost 5,000, you know, not even, like, it doesn't have to have a price tag on it.
It doesn't even have to
Yeah.
have a price tag
Yeah.
on it, you know. It's just
It's a mentality.
It's it's that, like, giving people the time of day,
Yeah.
you know, actually being human
Yeah.
around other people and bringing the humanness, I think, back to work. We're not
Yeah.
robots.
Yeah.
We're there to perform, but we perform best when we're doing stuff that we feel really engaged in.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you know, if we're doing something that we're really good at, like working to our strengths, if we're in an environment where we feel like we belong because our values are similar to the values of the other people, if our manager or leader understands what our drivers are and we're actually, our needs are being met at work,
Yeah.
then we just feel alive, you know,
Yeah.
hit on all of those three. And it's,
Yeah.
yeah.
And do you feel like, obviously at the moment there's a lot of work from home versus work in the office versus the hybrid model, all of that.
Yeah.
And I think I know with a lot of the clients I'm working with, there's that difficulty of, okay, how do I engage everyone? How do I make them all happy when they all have different needs? And now the needs outside the home or outside the office are required to be thought about as well.
Yeah.
You know, is that something that you're kind of working with some of your clients on?
I think so. This is something that everyone is struggling with at the moment. And like, there's like, we could probably sit here all day and talk about it. And I've so much to say about all of this stuff. The first thing I'll say is that not everyone does their best work at home, despite the fact that you might want to work from home and it's great and you can put it on a load of washing, you can cook a food at lunch, you can go out for a walk, whatever it might be. You don't necessarily do your best work there. So it's about understanding, like, where do I actually do my best work? Equally, when you go into the office, there's no point in sitting there and being on Zoom calls all day. Like, being in the office is about
the noise of
it's about collaborating. It's about bringing people together and, like, how do we work more effectively as a team? So I think it's really important to have that. One thing I miss working for myself is actually being in that environment and being part of a team and having that level of engagement on a day-to-day basis, which I don't have at the moment. But I think it is something that a lot of people struggle with. And, like, going back to your point about, like, how do we make sure that people's needs are met? It's having the language to talk about those kinds of things. And it has to be done on an individual basis. And I think understanding what motivates one person is not going to motivate another person. And when it comes to rewards and benefits, they need to be unique to the individual as well. And the manager needs to have those conversations about understanding, well, what does this person in front of me actually need or actually want from their work, and how do I help to do that? And I think the overarching issue with, like, maintaining that sense of culture, it is hard to do that, but individuals need to take responsibility as well. So you do, I think, build on the culture through having connection with other people. So making sure that you're actually, you know, building in time to have coffee chats with people if you're working from home a lot of the time. You know, it's actually having that sense of connection. And maybe it's just reminding people of why are we here from a purpose perspective, but also why are we here, and, you know, what is it that we're trying to achieve, and how is it that we're trying to achieve that? And, like, that will be the culture and the values and all of that kind of thing as well.
Because I think that collaboration piece is so key to, and I know I've worked on my own business in the past as well. And I know how lonely that can be when you're nearly waiting for someone to come home at 5 o'clock to entertain you. Because you're like, I haven't had my work colleagues to bounce off, you know, for the day. And if I work from home for a full week instead of coming into the office, I know that my mood and my perspective and my happiness index is different to when it is that I've been in the office or, you know, a few days. Now, I also feel like this compulsory or the mandatory, you know, fully back or fully at home is very tough on people, because I think anything that's mandatory and is enforced
it takes away your autonomy. And so you feel like you're being forced. Like, my hand is forced, I have to come in. I think, like, it's great that you have that sense of awareness that, like, when I'm not in the office, I actually, my happiness goes down.
I dip.
And I think people may not make that connection, that maybe they've worked from home for 4 days or for a full 5 days, but they don't actually make that connection that the reason I'm miserable is I haven't had social interaction.
And it can just be that low mood, and it's just like, oh God, I'm a bit low this week, and you're not really sure why. And I mean, there's in the other way, there's often days where you're in the office and you think, oh geez, Jesus, I just need some peace to get through this particular project. So I also see that side of things.
Exactly.
And I think that physical environment, which we kind of talked about as being part of that craft and culture piece, and you know, what's necessary is like that physical environment is so important. And if it is that you're being encouraged to come back into the office, and because you want that connection, you want the team building, that there has to be areas where you can also have your quiet moments. You can go and take a call. You can, you know, and I think
that you can put on do not disturb, and you're not going to have someone rock up to your desk and start asking about something. Totally.
And do you think with companies now kind of doing that mandated going back into the office, or, you know, a lot of companies are re-changing what their office buildings look like, and there's more quiet rooms and all that. Do you see that that evolving, you know, and companies evolving on the go all the time?
So I kind of had my opinion on this, and I've had a few conversations on the podcast about this, and with people separately then about this as well. And the interesting thing I think with this is, so on the one hand, and I'll say kind of both perspectives. So I had a conversation with someone, he's based in New York, and he was talking about the mandate, and saying, actually, I think that's kind of a good thing, because if you cast your mind back to early career, it's really positive for social interaction. It's really positive for learning, just like the kind of learn by osmosis, by just being around people who are doing the same job. You just pick things up, and you pick things up about the culture or about how things get done. And it's really positive from that perspective. And I hadn't really thought about it that way, that I do remember my early career. I remember it as being a fantastic way to make friends, a fantastic way to socialize, and to, like, this is me in a new city. So like, I'm sure the same thing applies, that when you're starting in work, you still want to make friends, you know, you want to be friendly with your colleagues and things like that. And it's much easier to do in person. And then I had an interesting conversation with someone else, and she said that her son actually prefers online engagement. And oftentimes we, as more senior people in an organization, or more senior people, you know, talking about our early career, make an assumption that that's what they want and that's what they need.
Interesting.
So I thought it was two interesting perspectives. So on the one hand, we're making assumptions about like, well, this is what early career people should want and should need, and this is how they're going to learn. When in fact, they are the digital natives. They grew up having Google at the center, you know, they are at the center of everything. So I think there's a few different perspectives, and that, you know, that's just kind of early career. I think we really need to think about it. Work is not a location. Work is what you do. It's how you do it. But where you do it, I think to a degree, it doesn't really matter. I think when you're doing collaborative work and you need to do brainstorming and things like that, we need to be in the same room. Because it makes all the difference. But at the same time, I think it has to be on a case-by-case basis. And I know that makes things a little bit difficult, because even within an organization, there might be perceived unfairness because one team gets to work from home longer than another or something. But really, it's about, you know... It's about the job, the skill set, and what's required for that. But also, more broadly, it's about the decisions that you make about your career. And again, I appreciate that not everyone has options. But if you choose to do something that requires you to be in an office, then, you know, you can't kind of, you can't go crying, or it's not necessarily in an office. Like if you're doing factory work or something like that, and you can't be a doctor at home. You can't be a pilot at home. I think we have to think about what is the best for an individual, whether it's an individual team, whether it's an individual organization or an individual person. And I think it does go back to it being, we have to start now looking at the workforce as not a numbers game. It's everyone is now an individual, you know, it's a collection of individuals. I think there had been a long time where it was like a workforce was seen as one unit nearly, whereas now we're really dividing it out into what does each people need. I think it was very interesting when you were talking about the new generation as well versus the old generation. I think there was a Gallup report recently that came out, and they were talking about 80% of the Gen Z population are happy to be going back to work and going back in the office, whereas it was nearly the complete opposite for the older generation who are maybe kind of closer to retirement age and are kind of thinking, I can go on the golf course for a few hours, I can, like, I have, you know, I've paid my dues, they have a lovely home office, whereas the Gen Z generation coming into the workforce, like you were just talking about, it's so important to make those bonds and to
to understand that these like, you spend so much time with these people,
Yeah.
you really gotta like these people, you know. So you want to get in there and get to know them.
Yeah, totally.
But I wonder, in terms of that older generation and the kind of the leadership side of things, are you seeing that the happier at work, you know, and that ethos, and really like so many people out there now trying to put a focus on that, is there resistance there, do you feel, at the leadership level?
I don't think so. I think it's less about a generation thing and it's more about a mindset thing.
Okay.
And some people have the mindset of work is supposed to be work. It's supposed to be hard. That's why it's called work.
Yeah.
And it's not about going and enjoying yourself. And also, by the way, I came through the ranks and I didn't enjoy my job, and I didn't have to, and I had to pay my dues.
Yeah.
And I think there are some people with that mentality.
Yeah.
And it's the same across, you know, lots of different aspects of work, like the women at work and things like that as well. So like some women don't support other women coming up through because, you know, I didn't have it easy. Why should you have it easy? And that kind of mentality. But I think I'm seeing a big shift. And again, it's the business case for creating better cultures, creating happier working environments. People are seeing the results from that, you know. And again, I would love to have the dollar amount on kind of an individual basis. There is research done that shows if you invest in like a group of stocks for organizations that focus on culture and happiness at work, actually the returns are much higher from a stock perspective. I can't remember the stats off the top of my head, but from a you know, a return on investment from a stock perspective and the value from a shareholder perspective, then it's actually a positive thing to invest in those kinds of organizations.
And do you think for leaders that are kind of maybe having that self-reflection time now and going, okay, right, there might be things we need to change, there might be things that we need to look at, is there simple areas that they can start? I mean, I feel like I get that question a lot of, oh my God, an employee experience strategy, it sounds huge, you know, and it's like, no, let's just start, you know, step by step, going up the ladder. Like you can do pieces of this at a time. You don't have to fix all of this tomorrow. Let's take it step by step. Is it the same for you, kind of, when they're going, how do we make everyone happy now? I want everyone happy at work now.
I'm that kind of person who's like, I just want everything.
Okay,
I want everyone to be happy now. How can we just do it all now? So I think for me, the first thing is, like, before you start anything, and I come from this research and data background. I'm such a research and data nerd. But it's actually understanding what the core issue is. So doing that internal research to find out what's actually going on, what's at the core of this. And oftentimes, a lot of the things that are the opposite of happiness at work, or should I say, the things that are causing unhappiness at work are not necessarily the opposite of the things that create happiness at work. So things like overwork, like we have way too much to do at the moment. Something I've only quite recently been really interested in is this idea of expectations at work. So I talk about expectations a lot, but I think it's not something that we're really giving a voice to. So I want to start bringing that more to people's awareness is, you know, let's say if you're a leader and you think you know what the expectations are, but maybe you're not sure, but you're also afraid to ask because what if it looks like I don't know how to do my job? If I have to ask, then it means that I don't know what I'm talking about. And there's this fear around asking for clarity and asking for clarity of expectations. But the trickle down effect of that is, if I don't know what the expectation is of me, then how am I supposed to create that expectation for the people who work with me? I can't set clear guidelines. I can't set, like, this is really specifically what we need to work on. And then all of that other stuff is busy work. But actually, I think a lot of the stuff that we're working on at the moment is that busy work, which doesn't need to get done, but we're spending time doing it. We're also spending way too much time on emails. Like, I think there needs to be an alternative. And like, we've had emails for, I want to say, like, the first email I sent, I think, was about 30 years ago. So we've had it for a long time. I'm not sure that it's fit for purpose anymore because of all the junk that comes through.
You do spend half your time just cleaning it up.
And then there's the amount of time that we spend in meetings, and then meetings about meetings, and meetings about meetings about meetings. So how do we get smarter about creating more space in our work days so that we can think about these things, so that we can be more strategic, so that we can take a bit of a breather and understand, and then how to create this, if we have the thinking time, if we have the space, then we can think about these things a little bit more strategically about, okay, so now that we're not chasing our tails, now that we're not busy doing all of this busy work that doesn't actually need to get done, or the priority has changed, but we didn't know about that, then how do we create this space to think about, okay, well, what's meaningful work for me? And how do I actually create that? What are the values, and how do I tell people and communicate and create that environment where they feel like they belong? How do I take time to understand people's strengths, to make sure that they're leveraging the strengths that they have, that they're looking for opportunities where they can use their strengths a little bit more? Strengths is not something we talk about at work at all. And then this needs piece, I think it's that requires that individual conversation, but having the language about what needs are, because I certainly didn't know that I even had needs at work when I was at work. But when I look back, I can see now where those needs were not being satisfied. And I think giving people the language to have those conversations is really, really important. And that drives a sense of fulfillment. And then if we're working longer hours, it's on the things that are really important and that need to get done.
To have the attention.
And it gives us this sense of fulfillment as well, because we're doing, we're ticking the boxes across those three pillars.
Like, something that really resonated to me when you were talking there was about this expectation piece. And I remember someone saying to me before, like a mentor that I had, and I was talking about the busy work, and I was like, I'm just so busy, and I'm up to my eyes, and I'm doing this, and this is expected of me, and this is expecting of me. And he just stopped me for a moment and said, and who has asked you to do that?
Love it.
And it just totally took me by surprise. Because I was like, well, what do you mean? Of course I have to do it. And he said, but who is putting that expectation on you? And it really was one of those, which seems so simple, but it was a bing, it was a light bulb moment for me to go, oh my God, I'm putting this expectation on myself. Like, no one has asked me to do all of this stuff. They just want me to get to this location. This is the mission we're on, and we need to get there together. So if I can find a different way to do that, I don't need to be doing this busy work. I don't need to be,
I think people watching will really relate to that. We make a lot of assumptions about what's expected of us.
And because no one is communicating, and you don't want to ask. Do you think, it sounds, gosh, do you think I should do it this way? They're like, God, just get on with your work. You think that's how they're going to react to you. But instead of just actually asking the question of, and maybe it's reframing it of, here's how I think I'm going to approach this. Do you think this is a good way for me to look at this, or would you be wanting me to look at it another way? And even just reframing it means you might get that little bit more guidance to understand what is actually expected of you.
But we get so caught up in our own stuff that if we just paused to bounce ideas around with someone, and they can catch the blind spots that we don't see. Like, they're blind spots for a reason. We're actually, I'm the kind of person, I like things to be really simple, but actually at the same time, as an individual, I can completely overcomplicate things. And I can cause my own complexity because I do that. And I have that awareness. And then I have to stop myself sometimes and go, am I overcomplicating this? Now, I have to say, ChatGPT has been really helpful for that, in terms of breaking down
let's
and
simplify this process.
Do I actually need this to be so complex, or have I just overcomplicated it myself by how I'm doing it? And I think that probably comes from almost a lifetime of working in those really complex environments and trying to make them simple. But I'm so used to being in that complexity that it's kind of a natural thing for me. But again, I think it's this awareness, isn't it? And, if we can clarify what those expectations are, whether they're expectations we place on ourselves or expectations that other people place on us, I think it will make a huge difference. I think it's something that's really important to talk about.
And I love that you've brought up ChatGPT, and I have a very good friend called ChatGPT and chat to him all the time. But technology at the moment is helping to get rid of some of that busy work, and which is phenomenal. So hopefully it does mean that people do have more time to have that, space, that thinking space, and that, that time to really look at what needs do they have that aren't being met, or how can they go about something in a different way. And I really hope, because for the past, I'd say for the last week or so, I've been having these conversations, and
I've been really interested in how are people using ChatGPT in their day-to-day roles. And I was really surprised to learn a lot of people are not using ChatGPT, either out of fear or they just don't know how to use it, or they don't know how it applies to them. And to me, it says a lot about organizations that they're not encouraging staff to, you know, whether they just don't have it. I, as an individual and running my own business, I can use it no problem. And maybe there are some barriers in some organizations, but like it's such a game changer to be able to bounce ideas around, to be able to script emails for you that you don't have to do the thinking. It's like, here's kind of what I want to reply. Can you help me make a reply? And or here's what I really want to say.
But I don't want it to sound like that. Can you please tone this down?
Can you say this in a, what's a professional way, or what's the polite way to say this? Or, you know, this is something I've done. Can you critique it for me? Like, it just saves so much time, I find, and we need to find a way to start using it more in our day-to-day, or just thinking about it. And I think oftentimes people just don't know where to start. And I think the trick is just start. Like, I can't remember the very first query I put into ChatGPT, but it was just probably a really simple basic thing. And as time has evolved, I started using it more and more, and then I ran out of credit or whatever it is, and so I've upgraded to the professional version, and now I use it all the time. It's like an assistant where I'm like, oh hey, I have to do this, and can you help me with that?
And it does work like an assistant.
But in professional and in personal life, it's like, in my personal life, oh hey, can you help me come up with some gift ideas for this person? And then it will maybe give me 10 ideas, and I'm like, I like those 2 ideas, can we build on those with some more ideas? You know,
and I think it's definitely something that companies need to embrace. And I think there is a lot of companies embracing it now, thank God. I know there's a fear around, if I'm using ChatGPT and I happen to put in something from a client that's confidential, there's all of these confidentiality worries with large corporations, which I completely understand. Because you can't have people just
do that,
plugging personal information or company information into ChatGPT. But I think the sooner companies embrace it and come up with their own policies around it and their own internal system, exactly, the better, because people are going to use it, and we don't want to be afraid of it. We want people to be using it and to be making sure that they're getting that assist when they need it, but that it's all under the same policy. So I think that's going to be an exciting way to see how companies evolve, and also how the happiness index is going to evolve there as well. Like, will there be some people that are like, well, I really enjoy doing like 4 hours on a spreadsheet, and now I don't have to do that anymore. So now it's going to bring up, I think, quite a lot of internal reflection. I think is probably going to be what's needed when people do start to see that some of their role may be able to be replaced, but that means that they're actually going to be freed up to do other things, and how that makes them feel.
It's such an interesting perspective, and I'd love to pick up on a few things there. The idea that, like, ChatGPT general has access to obviously public information, and so you can use that for research purposes right now. The internal piece, and you know, having something that's protected that can't be accessed by external people, and being able to like summarize a document, for example, or pull out the key points, or you know, things like that, they just really help us to speed up the work that we do. And then on this idea of I'm trying to think now, what was the other thing that you were saying in relation to,
I suppose, people feeling, are they being replaced in some ways, and what their skill set
their
is
job,
going to
like I'm the kind of person who I'd happily sit at a spreadsheet for hours. You know, I love that kind of thing. I love that, the analysis and the deep analysis. But if you now have a tool that can save you 4 hours of wading through a spreadsheet to find out what's going on, and you can just plug it in, and within less than a minute it can pull out some of the key points, like that saves you a lot of time. And I get that puts potentially some jobs at risk, but then it kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, and coming back to the point that you made as well, Gráinne, it's thinking about, well, what are my skills here, and how can I put those to use in other places? And I think that's why it's, for me, I don't necessarily talk about skills. I talk about strengths and understanding what your strengths are. So someone who enjoys spreadsheets, maybe they have a really, I was going to say a really strong strength. Maybe one of their strengths is around analysis or being methodical. Like those are some of my strengths, and I do love that. But then it's thinking about how do I apply that strength to another skill, because the skill of going through a spreadsheet and picking out all of the key points or analyzing the data, that's not necessarily acquired anymore. But maybe I can put that to something else. You know, use that strength towards another type of skill
and
that
it's
I can develop.
evolving, really, isn't it?
It's evolving.
It's personal evolution in you know, in who I am and what I can bring to the table.
Exactly.
And then it's also the workplace evolving with it. I think, for sure.
Totally. Yeah.
So before we finish up, Aoife, I would love to hear kind of some snippets or some takeaways from you in terms of being happier at work and what an employer or an employee could kind of take away from this chat.
Yeah, of course. Like, so for me, the biggest thing always is, going back to my earlier point, as an organization, it's listening to your employees. So I think oftentimes we're really guilty of, well, what are they doing down the road? What are other organizations, like, people are so nosy, they want to know what other people are doing. But actually, what other people are doing is not necessarily going to work in your organization. So as an organization, as a leader, it's about understanding what's not working in your organization. Like, I have tools to be able to help people to understand that. As an individual, again, coming back to the three pillars as an individual, like you can't really control the psychological safety, you can't really control the leadership. But if you think about values, and as an individual, do I know what my values are, and do I know how my values align with the organization? Do I know what my needs are? Because I certainly didn't when I was working. You know, understanding what are my core needs at work, and you'll know when your needs are not being met because you feel really frustrated. And then strengths, and there's so many tools online that you can use to understand what your strengths are, free tools, paid tools. Understand what are your strengths, and really think about how you're getting to use your strengths at work. Like, if I think about my career, I got to use my strengths a lot, but there were some roles that I didn't, and I think that's where I was, you know, starting to feel a bit miserable. I'm like, I'm not getting to work on my strengths all the time, and I didn't really make the connection until, you know, until I left and I look back and I had done all the research and like, that's what was going on there. So I think thinking about those three things, you'll get like 99% of the way there.
Brilliant. Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much for being here and for the chat.
Thank you. I've really liked that. You know, I definitely think we could have gone on for another couple of hours talking about all this stuff.
We'll do it again.
Definitely.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.